Welcome to Catholic in America. Today our topic is going to be on what would it look like in America for Roe versus Wade to be overturned.
We're going to talk about the reason why abortion is so prevalent in America, some of the fears that people have at the prospect of Roe versus Wade being overturned, and what our response should be as Catholic Christians.
This is a very serious subject, and it's not one that's just for Catholics, but it's for anyone. So we invite you, if you're Catholic or not, to please come in and join us.
Welcome to Catholic in America. We're talking today about the prospect of the overturning of Roe versus Wade. I'm Father Michael Nixon. I'm joined by Father Doug Martin and Father Tom Dillon. It's so good for you guys to join us and also be having this conversation with you all. Obviously a very controversial one. People have very strong opinions on this. And hopefully, as we have this discussion, we can take seriously those who disagree with us. So if you do disagree with us, please watch to the end, and hopefully it's going to be a good and fruitful conversation. So maybe kind of just start and recognizing that abortion is very prevalent in our country. It's a procedure that really received federal recognition of the right to abortion in Roe versus Wade back in 1973, and has so that's federally recognize now the possibility of the Supreme Court overturning that decision and making it kind of go back to the states. So, but it is something that is prevalent, and maybe we can get into some of the whys behind it. Why is this something that is happening so often and that people are so passionate about?
I think one of the reasons why that it is prevalent in our society is because sex is prevalent in our society. And so, and not just inside of marriage, but outside of it as well, and with multiple partners. And so anytime that happens and someone has a pregnancy with someone that they would not see themselves marrying, but someone that they just, that they had a relationship with or a relation with, that it might not be, they wouldn't want to have a child with that person. They wouldn't want to keep a child with that person. And so, that's one of the reasons.
Also, too, just recognizing that having a baby is costly, is not just costly as far as money, it's costly as far as time and effort and the mother who gives birth to the baby, her own body, so it's something that costs a lot, that's painful, that's difficult, and that a lot of people see abortion as the solution to that, as one of the solutions to that. And so wanting to maintain the legality of abortion is to maintain in the sense that people have an option or they have a choice. Going back to the term that's used a lot is having a choice within this.
And it changes your life. And that's one thing that when you have a child, like when you have a couple who's having a child, they get told 1,000 times, this is going to change your life, especially when it's the first one. So you can imagine being single and it being, maybe it's happening inside marriage too, and they're not ready for it either. But just how bringing another human into the world changes everything about your life, brings on a particular responsibility for this person, no matter how that takes.
Well, and you also take into account all the many ways in which how a person can become pregnant. Because in certain cases, you have people in the hookup culture who unintentionally get pregnant through a one-night stand or through a casual relationship where they never intended to get pregnant, but they're engaging in sexual activity. You also have cases of people who were not married, or different other situations where people just not ready right now, and the pregnancy was unplanned, unexpected, and therefore they're trying to find a solution to their problems, whether it be financial problems or emotionally, they're just not ready right now, stress, anxiety, all the reasons that can impact why a person makes that decision. You also have the extreme examples of how people get pregnant, which is in cases of violence. So you have cases of rape, you have cases of molestation, and then incest within the families, which is where even, again, a lot of modern conservative people are just wanting to leave open that doorway for, in cases of rape or in cases of incest, like these were not the natural way, these were acts of violence or acts of perversion, and therefore these persons should not be unduly burdened with having to carry this life for 9 months.
They've already been hurt by this act of violence.
So there's, all the wide ways in which people can get pregnant. Obviously, you find areas of the world today where, there's some evidence and reportings of places around the world where people, especially in military conflicts, for like the cases of of assault and rape, and times of all the different ways in which this happens. And so people are like, it's not fair for people to have to carry these lives. They should have an option. They were not given an option. This is one way in which they can at least be given back some measure of control over their life, which was stripped from them and taken unduly and unjustly.
Yeah, and, and timing as well. I mean, a teenager getting pregnant, maybe a mom who's got several or 5, 6, maybe 7 kids, trying to economically afford that. Maybe it's,
psychologically,
someone later in their career. Not to mention if the child, if there's already perceived defects, medically, they can tell those sorts of things. So there's lots of reasons.
Recognizing too some of the fears, particularly as the possibility, and again, whatever this, we're not deciding what the Supreme Court decides here, and this isn't a law show, so
not at all.
So how that works, but with the prospect of Roe versus Wade, that kind of foundational decision being overturned, and then Casey versus Planned Parenthood versus Casey as well, which kind of further cemented the federally regulated right to an abortion. That those getting overturned, the fears that come up, and so I think recognizing those fears, reactions, a big fear that a lot of women have, and a lot of women have voiced of someone else making decisions for them, making medical decisions for them, for their own body. The reason why it's a slogan is because a lot of people feel this: my body, my choice. So being able to say that in a sense, that the fear that's happening here is that ability to choose is going to be removed from them, which is a terrifying reality to have that kind of prospect put out there.
And it may just be the beginning. I mean, I think that's part of the fear too. Is if they're willing to do this, how much further they're willing to go with my body. How much you're going to invade my body, and how much you're going to tell me what I'm going to do with my body. And so I do think that's part of the fear as well.
Well, and there's also the fear of this feeding into more, whether it be perception or not, but feeding into more inequalities. There's this question of inequality. If I no longer have control over my decisions and my future and my life, then this places, again, women, on kind of a cultural level, this places women once more under the thumb or under the dominion of men. And so this perception that, okay, inequalities are going to now it's going to be like a domino effect of that, well, this one get it overturned, this one would get overturned, and this one. A lot of people are afraid that with the overturning of Roe versus Wade, if that does happen, that what's next on the chopping block? Is it going to be artificial contraception? Is it going to be all the different laws which would be placed in
elective surgeries?
Elective surgeries, in vitro fertilization. Like what about all these other processes? Like where our choices are now being restricted and told that we can't do these things.
Not to mention that some of these laws aren't very specific just yet. And so some of the laws that are being written is that these women can be prosecuted if they have what's called a spontaneous abortion, when the child dies naturally inside the mother for whatever reason. That there's some of these laws that may not protect that, because there could be a suspicion that maybe they forced it to happen. And so women are like, how far, or people are like, how far is this going to go?
And just the fact that very prevalent fear, concern, accusation, however you want to put it, that this is going to result in the prosecution of women in desperate circumstances who have had abortions or are seeking an abortion, in a sense that now the full force of the law is going to be going to prosecute and to persecute them as well. That's definitely something that's coming up a lot. I think too, just getting back into the kind of the inequality aspect, people recognizing that abortions are prevalent in many lower income neighborhoods, prevalent in areas that are afflicted by poverty, definitely in minority communities as well. This is something there's a high percentage, and so that this, in a sense, could be said to be directly targeting those women and those families and keeping them from being able to make progress, to be able to lift themselves out of poverty. This is something that is I definitely hear this a lot from people saying this abortion is what's helping women to step out of poverty, step out of difficult circumstances, step out of under the thumb of abusive men or abusive systems, to become more, have their own agency and be able to make their own decisions. And so that's something that is definitely a fear and anxiety and a stress that a lot of people have.
But another part of this is also the fact that Roe versus Wade was, at least in terms of the legal language, was about privacy laws. And I actually was talking to somebody the other day who was actually pro-life and was against abortion, but was concerned with the privacy laws because there's other pieces of our society and other laws that are based upon privacy. And so if you take away the privacy language with how Roe versus Wade was promulgated, then that's going to have a ripple effect. Like, how does that affect how drugs are transported across state lines? How does this do all the ways in which medical services are available across the board, as well as when you restrict certain medical procedures and medical rights, the danger of people therefore having an onerous burden, like the people who are having to travel 2 or 3 states away, because if abortion becomes illegal in a particular state, it'll still be legal throughout the rest of America or in other states in America, but it's going to place this undue burden, this onerous burden, which will then, is this going to also then create back alley abortions, where women's health is even further in danger, because when they want to get an abortion, they don't have ready access to it. Then they have to go to these back alley abortions where, one, it's illegal, but two, like their own, that was the whole thing with like the Bill Clinton era, is safe and rare, like access to safe, rare abortions.
Safe, legal, and rare.
Safe, legal, and rare. So but is this going to mean that now more women are going to die having to try to get these procedures, which...
Well, I mean, what happens in the case of a cesarean if you lose the child? What happens in the case if you have a midwife who's there servicing the mother? I mean, there's all these different cases that come up. I mean, I know a lot of the groups that are for these natural birthing and natural family birthing opportunities that are actually against overturning Roe versus Wade, even though they would not consider themselves for abortion necessarily, simply because of the privacy and the sanctity of the woman's body, and not make a decision for them.
I think also too, just one of the things that is just kind of the blanket that you should not have an opinion on this, and we being 3 men that are here, 3 Catholic priests who are men. One of us is married and is a father, but the other two are celibate men.
Get ready for the tweets.
You cannot have an opinion on this, because you're not a woman, because you aren't you're not the one impacted by this. Right. That's definitely something that is very strongly felt and articulated, and I think too, going back to like kind of the snowball of this, if this is sort of the this isn't the end, of the argument, but if this is overturned, if Roe versus Wade is overturned, what's next there, and how far will the religious right or the political right or the Abusive Men of America Association, or whatever it is, go in order to take away rights from women for making their own personal decisions. So recognize this is fraught, and this touches on all areas of sexuality and gender and relationships and politics and medical decisions and privacy and all sorts of stuff. I think we're going to maybe begin to discuss too is what is our own response as Catholics to this, to the multi-layered reality of abortion, to women who have had abortions and families that have been impacted by it, women in crisis pregnancies, but also how are we called to respond? If tomorrow Roe versus Wade is overturned, what does that mean for us and what we're called to do? So we're going to take a quick break, but stick with us as we continue to discuss this very important and timely topic. Hey guys, thanks for checking out Catholic in America. I'm Father Michael Nixon, and I like to party.
And I am Father Tom Dillon, priest here in the Diocese of Pensacola, Tallahassee. I think I have the longest hair in probably the state, and I too like to party. I like whiskey and cigars.
Father Doug Martin. I'm also a priest here in the Diocese of Pensacola, Tallahassee, and I'm married and Roll Tide.
Oh my goodness. Oh, yes, sir. I was okay with the being married part, the Roll Tide thing. In Catholic in America, we engage the intersection between faith and culture.
Tune in every week because no topic is out of bounds.
We want to thank you so much for supporting this show by watching it, by liking, sharing, and subscribing. How else can they support the show?
You can also become a patron on Patreon and support us financially.
So if you support us, there's all kinds of swag. There's t-shirts, there's coffee mugs, or maybe bumper stickers. I don't know. Maybe we could come up with a wig from Father Tom.
Father Tom wig would go a long way. So thanks for your support. God bless y'all, and check us out next time on Catholic in America.
Welcome back to Catholic in America.
Please like, share, or subscribe.
So we talked in the first segment. Again, this is a serious topic. It's painful. For those who disagree with us, thank you so much for watching, because that really shows that you're open dialogue, and we hopefully are too. That we're trying to seriously engage with the struggles that people have, the legitimate fears that they have as well. But we want to talk a little bit about what we believe as Catholics about abortion, but also too about the other issues that this impacts, about women in crisis pregnancies and areas of poverty, women who have experienced their agency being taken from them, and what we are called to do and how we're called to impact the society as Catholics, as followers of Jesus. So maybe just laying this out there, kind of some of those fundamental things we talked about sex or about unwanted pregnancies. What are some of the things that I think would be important for us to maintain and highlight as Catholics?
Well, I think that there's a common objection that we hear. I mean, we've all heard it, and anyone who's involved in this conversation has heard this a lot, which is that, okay, well, you're concerned with the beginnings of life, right?
Yeah.
You're concerned with protecting the beginnings of life because part of our Catholic faith believes that what is within the womb of every female who conceives is a life. Now, how do we define that life? Obviously, there's a lot of philosophies and things like that. From our Catholic perspective, our philosophy is that the very first stage of human development is the embryonic stage. And so what is within the woman's womb, who has conceived life within her body, is a life, is a life force, is a life, and there's a distinctive individual there. But as we probably all heard, the question is why are you so concerned with taking care of life at this stage of life? What about when it's born and now this child is born into an abusive family or into an impoverished family or into a single parent or a no parent family? What about the rest of that life? And I think that's also a really important, it's a valid criticism, but it's also really important that the Catholic perspective is that we have a duty to take care of life at all stages, from beginning, conception to natural death. And so that's why we do have to take care of the child. And we do have to ensure that the child, as well as actually not just the child, but the parents and all the extended people who are affected by the birth of every individual. People are affected by childbirth, and it's not just the child, it's also the mother, it's also the father. And so we have a responsibility as Catholics to protect life, again, through childhood all the way through adulthood. It's also why, as Catholics, we stand for life at all the stages. It's also why we stand against things like euthanasia, which says that people have less value, or that they should commit suicide at the very end of their lives because they should be given that choice and option. And we say, no, there's value to life at every single stage. And that we are called, now, does everyone live that out perfectly? No. And do you obviously find people who are just more concerned with making sure the child is born? That's where the Catholic position is, that we have to take care of our brother. That every single person who is conceived through the actions of God, and that we have a responsibility to take care of our brothers and sisters, and that we value life at every single stage.
Yeah, I've seen a meme that's been passed around for several years now. It's a cartoon meme of a mom who's pregnant, and there's a group of people around her that are saying, just have the baby, and really trying to encourage her to have the baby. And then once the baby has come out and she's holding the baby, that same group of people are around her calling her a freeloader, telling her that she's a rotten mom, she's a single mom, those sorts of things. And so whether that's true or not, that's definitely the perception. And we all know that, with perception, lots of times that's the perceived reality as well. And so I think that's where some folks are coming from. And I think it's easy for us to say as a Catholic Church that we do support women afterwards. We do, have services and things, ways that we try to support them, but never to say that we think we're doing enough, that what we're doing is sufficient maybe. Maybe we're doing the most that we can do as a church, maybe not, but we think that we're trying to, and that that may not be sufficient. So there may be something else that's required. There may be something more that needs to be done for mothers and for them to encourage them to have children. And I think that's also where some of the argument turns. That's where some of the conversations turn and can be, well, it can look a lot like this meme.
Well, I think too that one of the things, particularly when we're talking about what the Catholic Church teaches about, or how we're called to respond as Catholics, and we'll get in more some more of the concrete responses, the possibility of overturning Roe versus Wade, what hopefully every single person who's watching this will do, no matter where you're at on the political spectrum. But unfortunately, it's basically, is this a conservative or a liberal thing, or is this a product, not Protestant, but a Republican or Democrat? So in a sense, to say that the Catholic position is one of these, but the policy kind of becomes do you have a welfare policy in place or not,
right?
Or are you in favor of abortion rights or not?
Right.
Instead of saying, okay, how are we in favor of the person, the mother, and the child, and all the people that are involved?
And I think the other difficulty with the conversation is because there's a perceived dichotomy between, well, this is a faith question versus this is a secular question.
Absolutely.
So it's like people who say and try to restrict abortion rights or perceived abortion rights, and they say, well, you're imposing your faith, and there's a separation of your faith from our secular culture.
I'd say most of the discussions I've seen have been that way.
Yeah, so it's like faith and culture, your moral beliefs should not impact the lived out experience and life of another person who might not share your faith. And so therefore, this is a question of faith and people of faith trying to impose their religious beliefs upon people who might not share the same faith. And therefore, is it a violation of freedom of religion and freedom from religion, depending on how you understand.
Separation church and state.
Yeah. So is this the church coming in and doing that? I think that
putting a theocracy.
Yeah, are we creating a theocracy?
Yeah.
I do think obviously that's a false to me, because there's also many people who do not have faith. I know of atheists who stand against abortion and who stand against and say that we need to limit this or eliminate it entirely. So it's not just a faith question, but there is that perceived people who are impressing and trying to force faith or morality upon people who don't agree with it.
Yeah, and this gets into as well, I think, just as Catholics, as followers of Jesus, what we believe, what we profess and teach about women in unplanned or crisis pregnancies, women who have had abortions, women who have chosen this for themselves or for their families, whether they regret it or they don't regret it, that's really coming back to that those women are loved by God, and that all of us are sinners, all of us need the mercy of God. And that I think that's always important to say, that no matter what their experience is, where they've been, that God still loves them, the church still loves them. We're made up of sinners as well. We're the biggest sinners. I'm definitely the biggest sinner I know, and I know you guys probably are too. No,
I agree.
And you agree that I am. And really, no matter where you've been and what you've experienced, that the beauty of our faith is not some sort of moral perfection that we hold over others, but that God is merciful and loving and wants to bring healing there. And I think that's maybe the message that we could do an even better job of conveying and preaching and living as well. Do we live that kind of mercy for people who have made this decision and have had an abortion, or is it, how can I get the law, to punish that person, which I think is a tendency that all of us can fall into.
Right, and not, it's very difficult to come across as caring and not patronizing when you're actually uncaring and patronizing. And I think that's sometimes the view of people who I think that's sometimes where we are coming from. And I say we because of my own belief about abortion, and but that sometimes we don't come across the right way, and that we have to really take that into consideration and understand that that's part of the rejection of what we're trying to say as well, and that we have to be true to the gospel, as you're saying. That it's not just at the beginning we're not just worried about the mother having a baby and then, all right, you're on your own, do what you got to do, and if you don't, you're a deadbeat or a freeloader. But that like you said, that we see that person as having the intrinsic value that they have, deemed by God, and that we love them in the way that God would love them. Not in the way I would love them necessarily, because I'm imperfect, but with the way that God would love them, that Jesus would love.
Well, I think that also what causes a lot of problems with this issue, and also a lot of unnecessary schism and division between people of different perspectives and different beliefs on this. But even people, and then kind of going and jumping off what you were saying, like going back to Corinthians, I believe it says love is patient, love is kind, and like that description of love. But there's also that one little key phrase in Corinthians where it says love is not rude.
Yeah.
right? So like I can be right in what I'm saying, but I can do it completely insensitive, because that's what rudeness is. When you're a rude person, you do things which are insensitive. You don't take into account. That's why packaging actually does matter. How you say things. It's not just enough that you say something which is true, which is like from a Catholic position, like abortion is evil, it is a wrong, it is an ill, but you also have to say it in a way in which the other person is able to receive it. And that's where you have to take into account sensitivity. Love is patient, love is kind, love is not rude. But there's been a lot of people, and this is a valid criticism of the pro-life movement at times, is that you have people who call themselves pro-life, but they yell and scream at people who are in very difficult situations, and they say the truth, but they do it in a completely callous and insensitive way. And that's not love. Like, love is patient, love is kind, and kindness is to give people the truth and to will the good of the other person, but it's also not rude.
Right.
And so like there's a lot of hostility and a lot of ways in which people have hurt people unnecessarily by smacking them over with the I call it the giant club of truth. And like God, Jesus doesn't go after people with clubs.
No.
Like he's the master
He goes after
surgeon.
leaders. He
goes after the sword with a sword which cuts two ways. But so that's what I'm saying. Like in that, there's also people who have been driven away from the executive.
And if that's one of our listeners or viewers today, we repent on their behalf and recognize that we're all imperfect. Now think about as Catholics, the legality of this, because in a sense, sometimes it gets reduced to, okay, if we overturn Roe versus Wade, because as Catholics we believe that a human person has inherent dignity and rights from the moment of conception to the moment of death. They need to be protected, and the law needs to protect them. So in a sense, this is a law that has opened up the Roe versus Wade as a decision from the Supreme Court that has opened up the possibility of taking those lives before they're born, intentionally through surgical and chemical abortions. So in a sense, it's like, okay, well, we need to change this law. Now it's a possibility of this law being changed. So then it can kind of be like, all right, we're done. But I think maybe one of the things too, we can I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts on that. One of the things I've been thinking is that in our country, we're very we have a lot of legal positivism, where if something is legal, then it is good. So which is one of the reasons a lot of times why there's been people pushing for certain things to be legalized in our country, because then in a sense it gives the stamp of approval that this is now good. So we've definitely seen that within abortion. It was legalized, kind of it was in 1973 that it was legalized, or at least the federally recognized right to this under the right to privacy. That kind of then became, within the language, within the way it was approached, sort of, that like, this is a good thing because it's now legal. So, but I'm not sure other aspects of the legality of this that we as Catholics need to maybe look at or impact society.
I think that especially as Catholics, we have to realize, like, from our stance, and this is not from our position as Catholics, this is not a faith question. It is a social justice question.
Right.
And because we do believe in social justice, and that not the way that it's sometimes used in the world colloquially by certain movements, but we do believe that we are called to protect the rights of all people, and that we actually, as a society, that every single person, regardless of faith, has a right to protect the innocent. And that's the purpose of society itself, is to protect people as well as to foster life. And so these are the two primary ends of society, is to protect the rights of their citizens, the rights of all people, as well as to foster a community where people can live in peace. So when you look at that, like, this is not a question so much from the Catholic position of faith and us imposing our faith upon other people. This is about the very understanding of what society is. And so within this question, like, you have a question of social justice. It's like, people are if this is a human person, then this person is being killed unjustly. And this falls in the same category of, like, slavery in the United States for us. Like, this is a question of, like, slavery was also at one time legal. And actually, interesting, the Supreme Court decided to overthrow the Dred Scott decision that they had made prior, and then they decided later this was a terrible law, and they decided to overthrow Dred Scott because it was a social justice question. And so, from the similar sense, like from the Catholic position, this is a social justice question. This is not as imposing our faith. And so within that, like, this is a hugely important, but it's also, when you look at the overturning of Roe versus Wade, if that indeed happens, that's not going to eliminate abortion in America.
It's not.
All that that's going to do is kick it down to the lower courts, and it's going to kick it down to individual states. Individual states will be able to restrict, or they'll be able to open the door. There's even states right now who are talking about putting into their state constitutions, protecting the fundamental right to abortion. And versus other states, there's, I believe, 15 to 25 states who have immediate laws in place to totally restrict or to eliminate abortion. So abortion is not disappearing from America, because as Catholics, we have to convince people to change their minds.
And that's it. The assumption is that if this is overturned, that all of a sudden the battle's won and there's no problem anymore, or that finally those people will get what they deserve, or, if you have an abortion, and that this is going to kind of settle the issue. When in fact, this is, like you said, not only is it kicking it down the road, you still have to deal with this as an issue because of the unsafeness of it if it's not in a hospital, if it's not in a clinic. And so it becomes, again, it's not over. That doesn't mean that it's gone away. And so now, in some ways, you create maybe not more issues, but you create different issues, or you accentuate the issues that are already there from someone not having an abortion, because you're going to have so many more who aren't able to. And then also you're making it unsafe for people, or the opportunity that it's not going to be safe for them. So without a change of heart, and I think that's where you were going with this, without a change of heart, I mean, that's really where we should be going as Catholics.
Well, and I would, sometimes I've experienced people kind of saying, well, the law, it doesn't matter what the law is because we need to change the hearts. And it's like, I think it's always the both and. I think this is an unjust law. Right. Again, the legality of it, I think it's a terrible, precedent that was set. It's led to the direct intentional killing of millions of children, the wounding of millions of mothers and families. We're going to experience, the pain of that. In a sense, overturning that is essential. Yep. But what that does open up, first of all, is the healing that needs to happen, because healing does need to happen for all those who've been impacted by abortion, or all those who will be impacted, or all those who will have abortions even when it's illegal. That there's healing that needs to happen there, outreach, mercy, compassion, understanding, walking with them. But also, too, that what hasn't been happening is there hasn't been a debate. And we as Catholics, I think this is something that we have a great tradition of within the Catholic Church that doesn't really happen in our modern American context, is actually saying, let's look at all the facts of this issue. Let's look at the facts. 1973, how much more have we learned about embryology? How much more have we learned about the development?
Well, and that's what some of the Supreme Court justices were talking about.
Yes, so much has happened. We now do surgeries in the womb. We now do like complex, amazing things that we can know so much about the babies. We have 4D ultrasounds.
Science, yeah.
And in a sense, none of that information has come into the public. It's all been like just the slogans. And so to get past the slogans of like, you want to control women's bodies, or, basically like every life is precious. In a sense, it's become sort of like a slogan, but to say like, if we believe what we say we believe about the inherent dignity of humanity, which is an American value, we have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In a sense, if one of those is impinging on the others, then it needs to be debated, needs to be looked at, which is what happened within slavery. People were using, this pursuit of happiness, we need to have this working class of people who work for free, and in a sense, looking at their life and their liberty and their pursuit of happiness. So the same thing in every other layer of society where difficult conversations need to happen, and where they don't happen, that's where unfortunately we get into vitriol, we get into hatred and violence. And we're never going to be free of emotions in this. And but to be able to have some actual, what is the actual truths and facts of this? And will I allow my mind to be changed? And this should be true for us as well. Can I have my mind be changed when facts are presented to me? And will that shift my position? And hopefully every person is actually willing to do that. I have a feeling, though, a lot of people aren't. And maybe that's one of the reasons why we don't have the actual debates.
Yeah. Well, but without dealing with the issues that come from abortion not being a right, and the issues, again, that come from that, from a mom having the child, if we don't deal with those, and that's what you're asking to do, is to have a difficult conversation about not just abortion and all the scientific knowledge that we have and framing that, but also what happens when we're asking potential mothers to have these children, whatever is going to happen after that next. If we're not talking about those things, then again, it's not it's not solving the problem. It's creating issues that down the line we have to talk about these things as well. And that's exactly why people view this as maybe a potential problem to have this overturned. Now, I mean, we wouldn't in the sense of that just because there's going to be some other issues that need to be talked about, that doesn't mean this should happen. But I've had people tell me that we just don't know what we're doing. This could be worse for the pro-life movement itself, just simply because it's going to expose some of that uncaring nature that some people, or at least people, are deemed to have.
I'm good with that. Mm-hmm. If it exposes problems in the pro-life movement, or if it exposes problems and hypocrisies within ourselves, then I'm okay with that. Mm-hmm. I think that's also, though, I think it is problematic. And going back to comparing this to one of the last times that you had a Supreme Court who overthrew a decision, which was the Dred Scott. I think there's been a couple other cases, but it's very rare that the Supreme Court goes back and undoes something which they've done. They don't like doing it. Right. But if you go back to that, the same questions that were surrounding slavery were the same reasons why slavery continued for such a long period of time, because it's like, well, how are we going to solve all these different domino problems? Mm-hmm. And so there was
the downstream effect.
They were like, there's going to be, and that was a big, huge thing, because you had a lot of people in the South who were not pro-slavery necessarily, but they did recognize the economic, the social, all these different problems. They're just like, we're just going to not deal with this issue. And then, like, you have grave social injustice, which continued to happen. And the same thing is true, just because there's going to be problems. Because one thing which I've heard, I mean, I understand where people are coming from. They're like, well, if we had 66 million people, how would we be able to take care of them and feed them? Like, if we had, like, think about that. We've had over 66 million abortions in America alone, not counting the rest of the world. Right. Like, if we had 1/7 of the population, which means that 1 in 7 people are not here today. Because of our population, we're about 350 to 400 million people. If you put another 66 million people plus on top of that, like, then people are like, well, if we had all these people, think of, like, the poverty, think of all the problems that we'd have, think about all these mouths we'd have to feed. Think of, like, we're already having problems with poverty and things like that. We add on another seventh of the population. Like, look at all these problems and look at all these. But that's the same. It's the same thing of slavery. It's like, how are we going to solve this economically? The question is, we're going to have a rotting of our society if we don't solve this grave social injustice. And if we are just concerned with predicting the future and prophesying for the future and trying to predict, and we're only going to overturn this grave evil when we have solutions to all the problems that spawn. And that's not the solution. I agree that, like, if you overturn Roe versus Wade, it's going to cause a lot of problems. It is. It's going to cause, but those problems we can, as a society, if we band together, if we unite, we are capable of overcoming every single one of those problems. It's going to take creativity. It's going to take innovation. It's going to take changing, sacrifice, change the perspective. But we can overcome as a society every single one of those problems. We won't be able to overcome those problems if we never deal with the fundamental issue. Right.
Which, again, that first right, and this is according to, American principles and values, is life. And so we never solve problems, downstream problems by upstream saying someone's life doesn't matter. In a sense, that gets back to, and this is something I think that not just Catholics, but every person would say, there's something wrong with the strong exerting their dominance over the weak. For the sake of the society, for the sake of the greater good, or anything else, to say that this person, because they're small, because they're weak, they can be dominated, they can be used. So in a sense, recognize too, this is a right. It is a rights question, and the right of every single person, especially those who don't have a voice, those who are easily exploited. And this is for the unborn. This is for the elderly, the disabled, the minority. Those every single person. We need to recognize that, and we as a society becoming more just the more that we are actively, in a sense, working against our own self-interest of the strong, the powerful, the wealthy, towards uplifting and defending the rights of those who have no voice. So what we're going to do is we're going to dive into now, because again, is a heavy topic. A lot of things that have come up is, what are some of the things that we should be focusing on as a society, as Catholics in society, Catholics in America, or followers of Jesus, or those who, if Roe versus Wade is overturned, if abortion laws that support abortion or abortion rights are rescinded in many different states, what should our response be? So maybe just take a couple of things that we should be thinking about that might be outside of your political affiliation. So but as followers of Jesus, and I think one of the main ones is recognizing, and I'm going to say this, I don't think that we should be forwarding laws that prosecute women who have sought abortions. I think that needs to be made clear. That needs to be because as soon as that happens, in a sense, then we're pushing ourselves to a place that is unsustainable and becomes kind of a law that can't really be enforced with any sort of equality. So some people might disagree with me there, but I think as far as our faith goes, say how do we help those women and to choose life, but also to be supported within that.
Yeah, because like you said, well, to a certain extent, we're going to have to define their terms a lot better than what they've been defined. Right now, you're right; they're just slogans. They're just things that we're saying: pro-life, anti-abortion. But to actually define what that abortion is and how it affects the mother itself. So defining that if a mom does lose a child, that they're not going to be prosecuted and put on trial to see if they actually had an abortion or whether this was something that naturally happened, that we're not going to come into that trauma and try and create more trauma. I think that's going to be a very important thing, that we do respect some of the privacy that should be there when it comes to how mothers lose children, whether it's through abortion or not.
And the pain that's around that causes. And recognizing as well that medical providers, just like any other aspect, that they have to be held to a standard, and they have to, if they're violating that by participating in abortions, that in a sense that there's legal ramifications for that. And I think that's just
where
consistent.
That's
where the legality needs to be addressed. Absolutely. So what other areas within society or things should we be working towards? Again, this is whether this gets overturned or not, Roe versus Wade, that we as Catholics should be supporting and.
Well, I think that one way that we can support and truly be pro-life is also in cases like this. Let's assume that Roe versus Wade is overturned. Being gracious. And being gracious to people who we might disagree with, and being respectful of the various different ways in which they also view things differently. So I don't have to agree with a person, and I strongly disagree with the pro-choice movement. But there's a way of graciously encountering people and being gracious with people where you're not, like one way, which is, again, the danger which I see with Roe versus Wade is like the pro-life movement gloating. Like gloating and glorifying in this great victory. And it will be a great victory for the pro-life movement if this happens. But still, there's a way of graciously, and going back to like comparison in the Civil War, one of the reasons why, especially like Ulysses S. Grant was able to create a modicum of peace after the Civil War between Lee's, because Grant, when he encountered Lee, the Southern soldiers who had been fighting on the cause of slavery were very worried that they were going to be treated poorly. And Grant, Ulysses Grant, who was commander of the army at that time, was very gracious in the way in which he dealt with his defeated enemy. And we're not, and that's also recognizing we've not, the pro-life movement, if we overturn Roe versus, we have not won. But two, the way in which we encounter people who we deal with who have a different perspective, this is like, you have to be gracious, you have to be respectful, you also have to recognize the nuance and the difficulty of what's going on. So that's where like encountering people and not like screaming and yelling or just saying I'm right, you're wrong, or you're going to hell, or all these different ways in which we've seen obviously people be very, very cruel, is one way. It's like recognizing, no, there's a lot of nuance to this. There is a black and white. This is a question of justice, but there's also a lot of way in the manner in which we deal with people is the way in which we are going to either heal and help the culture heal, or it's going to be a way in which we're going to be sticking our finger into an open wound.
And maybe creating a bigger rift.
And creating a bigger rift, exactly.
I think some ways as well is there is some legalities. I mean, there are some things legally that probably need to be done, such as supporting the mother. If she, we're hoping if she's in a state where she does choose to have the child where it's not, where she can get it, an abortion, and supporting the moms when they have it, because there's lots of moms that do do not feel supported. Lots of times their family turns on them, throws them out of the house, or they're in a situation where they're already not living at home or they don't have a close family tie. In other words, they don't have a support system. And so there's some sort of support system that has to be created, whether it's through new laws or those sorts of things. I'm not smart enough to say that or to come up with those things, but there has to be some support. And we can see that in insurance. We can see that in time off for mothers. We can see that in the way mothers are treated. And sometimes the reason why women have abortions when they're professionals is because it hurts them when they're away. Yeah. They're not given a promotion. They're treated differently. They're maybe even let go. They don't receive the same compensation because they're going to be away. So there's all these kind of things that would kind of lend itself to them not doing it, and to enact laws possibly, or at least to try and begin to protect moms so they're not being punished for doing this. Right. And there's lots of moms who's in situations where they're trying to decide, am I going to have this child or not, where they feel punished after they've had that child. So maybe with the first child they don't have an abortion, but with the next one they might, simply because of how they were treated afterwards, not just by particular people around them, but by society in general.
I think that goes with maybe laws, but also too, what's the culture? People who are watching, if you're part of a company, even a small business, what's the culture around that? Are you being supportive of that, or is it kind of like this constant, I'm super pro-life, but I'm against the, unfortunately, in the way our country's been split up, it's like if you're pro-life, then you're against welfare. That's kind of, because that's in a sense kind of like those are both sort of conservative values against the welfare state, but also against abortion. So not that saying that the welfare state is the solution to everything, but in a sense, what are we maintaining? Are we maintaining that we do need to lift one another up, that we aren't in some sort of isolationist thing, like good luck with your problem, don't have an abortion, but to say like, oh no, you're loved and supported, and we're going to come alongside you. I think that this goes into as well, how much are we advocating and lifting up as Catholic Christians, as priests with parishioners, foster care and adoption as well. That should mark us. That should become a normal thing within the Catholic context and Catholic parishes. That so often I think we don't even consider that. We don't consider adopting teenagers because they got lots of problems, or all the sort of things that go with that. But with generosity, to say, how can we, there's so many kids in foster care, there's so many kids in the system, and it's painful. This isn't to romanticize any of that. I know several great couples who are doing the difficult work of loving children well, and doing the work that helps those children to be back with their parents eventually, which has its own levels of pain. But to say like, okay, if we're going to say we're pro-life, man, that's what should mark us, and it has historically marked Christians, through the centuries as those ones that would take in the orphans and raise them as their own. And I think that's something that we as Catholic Christians, particularly in the context we're in the United States, that we should be redoubling and tripling and quadrupling our efforts, and we as parishes be supporting our members who do that. And
not leaning on the state to do it. I mean, taking matters into our own hands, because that's where some of the problems have happened is if not to say that we have state employees who don't care for those children, because we definitely do, but and not to say that just because they might be in a religious orphanage, they would be taken care of the way that they should be as well. But in both of those situations, we do more. We have the right people there as much as we can, and do the work of loving them. I
think it's also from what we can do as Catholics, we can also break, and jumping off what you're saying, we can break apart the false binary. And the false binary being that I have to support this political party or this political party.
And what do they tell me I'm allowed to be in favor?
That's a false binary, because there's problems with both platforms. And the life issue does extend to more issues than just abortion. So because to be pro-life is also to be against the death penalty. And that's part of what Pope Francis has come out, and people are like, oh, well, Francis, no, I'm like, there's not real, in the modern world, John Paul II said the same thing about the death penalty. He's like, the death penalty is a life issue, and in the modern world, in modern society, it is very difficult, if not impossible, to justify and legitimize it. So it's like recognizing like it's life at all its different stages. Now, when I have several hundred or several thousand people on the death penalty, it is a different issue, obviously, than 66 million children. And so there are qualitative differences between them, but looking at some of these other ones, immigration is also a life issue.
Yeah.
Like looking at some of these things that are across the board that are Catholic issues, and we have to stand for life in all of its developments, whether it be within the womb, whether it be a person who's from a different country, which goes to the scripture, which is that it's the widow, the orphan, and the alien, which is the illegal immigrant, the person who might be here. Like these are all issues of life, and how we treat the orphan, the widow, and the immigrant, the alien, is ways in which God will judge us.
Yeah.
Because when we say this isn't my brother, like Cain, like no, your brother's blood cries out. Then there's lots of different voices which is crying out to God for justice. And it's like recognizing and widening and remembering to widen the perspective and not to narrow the perspective down to, well, I'm pro-life and I'm anti-abortion. To be pro-life is to be open to life and to protect life and to help people wherever they are.
Yeah, all circumstances.
And wherever they come from.
I would say two other areas of support. We have some amazing crisis pregnancy centers that are working on the front lines really with women in crisis pregnancies. It's not just a matter of just keep your baby, but they're walking with women with STI tests and with parenting classes, with material support for them and for their babies after the baby's born, with ultrasounds, with medical checkups. There's so many great things that are happening there. And oftentimes they're getting no support from any federal funding at all, unlike, organizations like Planned Parenthood, which is the #1 abortion provider in the world. But this recognition as well, so them, but also groups like Catholic Charities too, that are doing the work with people that are in poverty and helping them to break those cycles of poverty. They're helping towards areas of education too. I think also, again, whether it's Catholic churches or schools or organizations or companies that are run by Catholics or followers of Jesus, we should say, like, what am I doing with my staff? Am I making life affordable for them? Insurance that is just, that ensures that people don't feel that that they're constantly under the gun as far as their medical expenses. There's a lot within that. The Catholic social teaching really is powerful and challenging, and it's inviting us to conversion out in the world too. So saying, again, we want to get rid of unjust laws, but we also want to make sure that our policies and the things that we're replacing it with are just and are
supporting this
are
decision.
Supporting people. Absolutely. Absolutely. But the other thing too is healing. There are some great ministries, and I just want to say that Rachel's Vineyard is a great series of retreats that goes for women and families, women and men too, that have experienced abortion or experiencing healing from that. I know several people that have experienced a lot of healing through that. But Project Rachel 2, which is a hotline that anyone can call, and maybe we can put the information for that at the end of this this or in the show notes. Just that for women that have had abortions that can seek some counseling there too. Catholic Charities a lot of times throughout the country. Catholic Charities USA, kind of the umbrella corporation, but also Catholic Charities locally does a lot of work there. Because again, we can't do this alone. And if we're going to talk about abortion, we recognize some people are carrying wounds from that go back decades. And that hope is possible.
Also
healing is
offering,
possible.
offering counseling services, offering psychological help, offering the ways in which people need to pick up the pieces of their lives.
Yeah.
And like you said, us as Christians, as Catholics, supporting those opportunities, because
we can't just be someone else does it, the church does it, or the government will do it. We're like, no, we need to be invested in that too.
We need to be invested in that. If we have gifts for that, we should be sharing those. But if we don't have the gift of, if someone out there is saying, I can't walk with someone like that, how are you supporting in other ways?
Absolutely. So we talked a lot about a lot of different things today. Obviously, the fears and concerns that people have that lead in the prevalence of abortion in our society, the possibility of Roe versus Wade being overturned and what that might mean, how we are called to respond. So hopefully this spurs some good thoughtful discussion for you. Thank you guys so much for watching, for supporting. Thank you to all those who support us on Patreon as well. We can't do this work without you. But for Father Doug and for Father Tom, thank you so much for joining us today on Catholic America. We'll see you next time. God bless.